reports. Yeah.
The president said on the White House driveway last week that he would be willing to work with and compromise with Nancy Pelosi if she becomes the House Speaker. What do you believe are now the top legislative priorities with the divided ruling?
Well, first, we have to finish this session, and we have a number of items extant. We have to finish the Farm Bill, we have to finish funding the government. The one issue that Leader Pelosi and I discussed this morning is where there could be a possible bipartisan agreement would be something on infrastructure. Look, there'll be a lot of other things. I think I'm not putting you all down, but when we do things together, it almost never makes any news. Even in this current situation where we have Republicans in control of all three branches, I have a long list here of things we did on a bipartisan basis, from water infrastructure, the best appropriations process in 20 years, airport infrastructure, FDA authorization, on and on and on. I mean, there are plenty of things that we work together on, and I always have to tell constituents who think we all hate each other that the Senate's a pretty collegial place, and even though we had obviously big differences over things like taxes and judges, there were plenty of other things we did together, and there's no reason that would stop simply because the House now becomes Democratic.
But other than infrastructure, what big issues are there?
Well, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, we'll see. That will all be discussed. Yeah.
So, will you insist on getting $5 billion for the president's border wall in this upcoming spending bill?
Well, we're certainly going to try to help the president achieve what he'd like to do with regard to the wall and border security. And that'll obviously have to be done on some kind of bipartisan, excuse me, some kind of bipartisan discussion. Yeah.
Any observations on the Kavanaugh effect?
Very helpful. Yeah, I think the Republican sort of core voters in the states that were critical to us were highly offended by the questioning of the presumption of innocence and the tactics. And I think it was like an adrenaline shot. We were worried about lack of intensity on our side, and I think the Kavanaugh fight certainly provided that and was extremely helpful. It's noteworthy that the one Democrat in a red state who survived voted for Kavanaugh, Joe Manchin.
You credited the president for his work for some Democrats in red states, but you obviously lost the House last night too. So I'm wondering what kind of impact do you think the president's rhetoric in the last couple of weeks having on your party, particularly with women voters and suburban voters in some of those key races?
Yeah, I'm going to try not to have us waste our time on sort of routine questions about what the president may say at any given moment. Look, I'm here to talk about the Senate. We had a very good day. Proud of what happened. The president was very helpful to us. Yeah.
Leader McConnell, if you look at the exit polls, one of the most important issues to voters was health care. Did you take away from that the message that any effort to repeal ACA at this point is dead?
Well, I think it's pretty obvious the Democratic House is not going to be interested in that. There are serious problems with Obamacare, serious problems that need to get fixed. They raised the phony issue of whether or not we were for or against pre-existing conditions. And I suspect it may have worked some places, fortunately, in our races, even though they tried to define health care on that issue. I think all of our candidates who subsequently won were able to make clear to the voters that everybody we knew was in favor of covering pre-existing conditions, including the candidates like Hawley and Braun and others. So the rhetoric doesn't solve the problem, and there are serious problems with Obamacare, and I think we're going to have to obviously now try to address that on a bipartisan basis. Yeah.
Both Leader Pelosi and the president have talked about fighting high prescription drug prices. Do you think that that's something the Senate could work with Pelosi on?
Yeah, I can't imagine that won't be on the agenda. Yeah.
Is there anything that the Senate Republicans could or would do to help President Trump in the event that Democrats in the House attempt to seize his tax returns?
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing.
What would Senate Republicans do in the event that the House Democrats try to obtain President Trump's tax records?
Well, you know, the whole issue of presidential harassment is interesting. I remember when we tried it in the late 90s. We impeached President Clinton. His numbers went up and ours went down, and we underperformed in the next election. So the Democrats in the House will have to decide just how much presidential harassment they think is good strategy. I'm not so sure it'll work for them. Yeah.
So I just to go back to that, are you recommending that for House Democrats that the oversight that they have said that they're going to do might backfire on them? Are you saying that they should?
No, they're not interested in my recommendations. All I'm doing is making a historical observation that the business of presidential harassment, which we were deeply engaged in the late 90s, improved the president's approval rating and tanked ours. Thus, my observation is that might not be a smart strategy, but it's up to them to decide how they want to handle that.
Senator McConnell.
All the way in the back.
Leader McConnell, is there anything that you're going to be doing in the coming months to increase the number of women who are being recruited on the Republican side to run for office?
It's been a frustration. I think I've mentioned to you before that we've had plenty of women candidates. A lot of them have not won. Marsha Blackburn won. We're hopeful that Martha McSally will win. I'm going to be trying to convince one of our women, for example, to go on the Judiciary Committee, something I've tried and failed the last couple of Congresses. Yeah, I mean, we need to do a better job of recruiting women candidates and getting them elected. Hopefully, we'll have 2 new women Republican senators here shortly.
Senator?
Yeah.
Talking about the House oversight that is likely to come, the president tweeted this morning saying that that if the House continues with their investigations, that we will likewise be forced to consider investigating them for all the leaks of classified information and much else at the Senate level. 2 can play at that game. Can you respond to that? What do you think about that?
Well, I'd like to focus on finishing up this session. We've got work left to do, and we'll see what happens next year. Yeah.
Have you had discussions with the president about any of that? I know you're trying to avoid that right now, but.
Yeah.
On this session, can you rule out a government shutdown?
Yeah, hopefully that will, you know, look, we need to work this out. We had the most successful appropriations process already in 20 years. 75% of the government got funded before the end of September. And we all know we need to work together here toward the end to finish that up. And we're going to do the best we can to try to achieve the president's priorities. And hopefully we'll not be headed down that path.
Senator?
Yeah.
What do you think of doing a DACA fix, either lame duck or next year? The what? DACA fix?
Oh my goodness. Well, you know, I can't imagine with all the things that we have to do here to wrap up this Congress that we would revisit immigration, but who knows?
What about next year?
It's on the, you know, it's on the agenda every year because we have serious immigration issues. I would remind all of you all, the Democrats had total control of the government in 2009 and 2010 and never dealt with the immigration issue. So it seems that no matter who's up or who's down, we have not been able to come to some kind of conclusion about what to do on immigration. The one thing I thought we all agreed on was this border security issue. Most Democrats voted for it 10 years ago. But we've had a challenge on that as well, as evidenced by the president's desire to build a wall and the reluctance on the other side to support it. So I can't imagine we'll do anything beyond trying to deal with this funding issue on the wall here at the end of the session.
Senator McConnell.
No, but in light, just to follow up on that, the president had made a real issue out of it going to the midterms about the migrant caravan and the crisis that it was causing at the border. Would you want to put immigration at the top of the list? And do you agree with the characterization the president used that it was a crisis from this migrant caravan that's coming?
Well, that's sort of an executive branch issue about what, you know, how to deploy security forces to deal with that. I'm sure the president will handle it skillfully.
Do you believe it was a crisis?
It's up. It's not a legislative issue. It's a question of how you want to deal with the security at the border. The president has wide latitude to do that, and he's taking advantage of the opportunities he has. Yeah.
Senator McConnell, if Democrats do engage in aggressive oversight of the
of the Trump administration, how will that impede your ability to work on a bipartisan fashion with Nancy Pelosi?
I'm having a hard time hearing you.
If Democrats do engage in the House in aggressive oversight of the Trump administration, would that impede at all your ability to work with a possible Speaker Pelosi on things like infrastructure?
No, I don't think so.
Senator, on health care, if the judge in Texas rules to strike down all or part of Obamacare, how do you think Senate Republicans might respond to that?
If what?
If the judge in Texas strikes down all or part of Obamacare?
Well, look, the healthcare system is still a pretty big mess, and it's obviously now going to have to be addressed on a bipartisan basis because the Democrats will control the House. And I don't think anybody's satisfied with the status quo. And the American people have given us divided government, which they've given us most of the time since World War II. They seem to like divided government. And I think the message is figure out what you can do together and do it. And I think healthcare is still a crisis and needs to be fixed. Yeah.
Leader McConnell, if House Dems push to expand Russia probes, do you think this is an effort to undermine the president? And is there potential to get out in front of the special counsel on this?
Look, on the Senate side, the Senate Intelligence Committee has been looking at that issue, and we expect them to report at some point in the future, and I look forward. And so far, they've operated on a pretty bipartisan basis, Senator Burr, Senator Warner, and look forward to hearing what they have to say.
Senator McConnell.
Yeah.
Leader McConnell, have you spoken to Governor Scott or Congresswoman McSally about their races, and how do you feel about their states?
Well, Governor Scott and I traded calls last night, so I've not actually connected with him yet. I'm going to be talking to him shortly. And I have not spoken to Martha McSally, although we traded calls too. They were pretty late at night. I decided to go to bed and talk to her this morning.
Senator McConnell?
Yeah.
A quick question. You're going to have an extra cushion in the Senate with extra seats on the Republican side. What will that enable you to do? Will this ease judicial nominations? What's the practical effect of all that?
Well, you know what my top priority is. I've made it very clear. It's the judiciary, the 2 Supreme Court appointments, the 29 circuit judges, the 84 overall number of judges, and we're not through doing those this year. The president, I think, has done an excellent job in picking young men and women who believe the job of a judge is to follow the law, and we intend to keep confirming as many as we possibly can for as long as we're in a position to do it. So it'll still be my top priority in setting the agenda here in the Senate, next Congress as well. Yeah.
Senator, will you revisit earmarks in the new Congress? And then a lot was made of your comments about entitlements in the last couple of weeks. Are entitlements an option?
The Democrats have made it perfectly clear they're not interested in dealing with entitlements, and they're in a position to say no, and so I don't think that'll be on the agenda.
What earmarks, sir?
I have no idea. I hadn't really thought about that. We've got a conference rule related to earmarks on the Senate side. I can't imagine that's going to change. Yeah.
McConnell, will a 10% middle class tax cut be on your agenda next Congress?
Well, any effort on the tax side would clearly have to be negotiated now on a bipartisan basis. And we'll just have to see what, I assume Nancy will be Speaker, we'll have to see what they want to do in this area. We'd have to do it together. We wouldn't have the possibility of doing it on a party line basis like we did in this Congress.
McConnell,
Yeah.
on some of the changes in the administration, in the cabinet that are expected, can you just give your view of what the confirmation battle, ground might look like? I mean, are you confident that you could, if there was a vacancy, let's say at the Department of Justice, could you easily do that? Would it eat up valuable time?
Well, I think we'll have probably more time for nominations in the next Congress than we've had in this one, because the areas of legislative agreement will be more limited, I think, obviously, between a Democratic House and a Republican Senate. I don't think we'll have any trouble finding time to do nominations. How controversial they are depends upon who it is. And the president makes that decision, and then we have to react to it. But he's signaled that there's likely to be a number of changes, and we'll process them.
Would you be comfortable with Sessions being replaced?
It's not up to me, Manu, to tell the president who to put in the cabinet. They serve at his pleasure, and if he makes changes, we'll be dealing with whoever is sent up.
Leader McConnell.
Yeah.
Leader McConnell, presidential election is obviously starting soon. Some Democrats are probably going to be announcing or testing the waters next couple of months.
Really?
What impact do you believe that'll have, and also the president's living re-election? What do you think that'll have next?
Well, it's going to be fun to watch the Democratic presidential aspirants, of which we have a number in the Senate, and Chuck may have some attendance problems from time to time, but it'll be interesting to watch.
Leader McConnell, do you plan on running for re-election
I do.
yourself? You do?
I do.
And are you confident that President Trump will support your re-election?
I'm sorry?
Are you confident that President Trump will support your re-election?
I wouldn't be surprised. Any more? Okay, well, thanks a lot, everybody.
All right, so that was the speaker there. Yeah, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Very big smile on his face. Those using his words, he's really happy about the results of last night. Picked up a couple of seats in the United States Senate. Chip Reed is there. We're going to talk to him about what the speaker had to say, but he was asked a couple of questions that he really didn't want to answer, including some of the language the president has used when it comes to the caravan, using troops at the border, the birthright citizenship that he, sort of tossed around as if he could get rid of with executive order. Essentially, Leader McConnell saying, look, those are executive branch decisions that has nothing to do with us, so don't ask me anything about them.
Yeah, he was also asked a couple of times about how he would respond to increased Democratic oversight of the president, right? Yeah, and the phrase he used was presidential harassment. We have to talk to Chip about that. So, you can already
just see, like, the way the politicians, this is all politicians speak.
It is.
That's going to be the hashtag for, I think, the Senate and Republicans, I guess, which is presidential harassment. And he does point out that his party, and then Speaker McConnell, engaged in presidential harassment during Bill Clinton's presidency. He doesn't point out that they did it during Barack Obama's presidency, but he says that it's not a good thing because generally it leads to a thumping at the polls when those folks are
for the party that's engaging in that. His phrase is presidential harassment. The other phrase is perhaps oversight.
Oversight and accountability.
What he did say, though, that for him, the priority was the judiciary, right? Getting more judges on the bench, and that's really what the Senate is going to be focusing on moving forward, at least according to McConnell.
Right. So we're going to talk to Chip Reed about this. The other thing that I thought was kind of interesting hearing Speaker McConnell is whether or not he's going to be able to work with, if it turns out to be Nancy Pelosi, who's elected the House Speaker, and keeping an open mind. Look, let's not forget, it's one of the things we remarked upon when we were watching the Kavanaugh hearings, that especially some of these older politicians who've worked together on Capitol Hill for many, many years, have seen some presidential administrations come and go, have seen battles around immigration, around infrastructure, around health care come and go. They may not see eye to eye on health care. Speaker McConnell saying that there's some real problems with the Affordable Care Act, but they seem to be open to working to fix it as opposed to outright repealing it, which is what they ran on during the Obama administration. There's another thing that Lindsey Graham said yesterday that was sort of hinted at here when Speaker McConnell was talking about, which is, everybody knows that both sides of the aisle have been looking for compromise on immigration reform. And that is perhaps something that he will be able to work on with the Democrats who are now in control of the House.
Yeah, in fact, there are several areas where there could be common ground. Immigration reform is one. Both sides agree that something needs to be done about the immigration system. Infrastructure has always been a safe area for both parties. The judicial, criminal justice system is also an area that both parties agree there needs to be some tweaks, some changes. So there is sort of plenty, there's a starting point for a conversation. And what Mitch McConnell also said, because he was asked directly, well, say the House decides that they want to harass the president or, be more aggressive in terms of oversight. Would that make it difficult for you to work with Nancy Pelosi should she become the Speaker of the House? And he said no.
Yeah.
No question.
No question about that. I think sort of one of the other things that we heard from this Speaker McConnell there is he's sort of hedging his bets right now because the one thing that there's a compromise that will happen, right? The Senate being controlled by the Democrats will mean that and Major Garrett pointed this out to us earlier, anything that the president wants to do in terms of setting up his government is going to have, he's not going to have any issues because now they've added seats to the Republican majority in the Senate. So